Hey, this is Now You Try, a podcast about self-sufficiency, sustainability, craftsmanship, and everything it takes to do it yourself.
I'm sitting here in the home office, the home studio, kind of doubles as both. And it's the night before we're taking off for the coast. So if you listen to the episode earlier that came out earlier this week, Luke and I talk extensively about fishing the Texas coast and kind of that being a rite of passage and how great that is for sourcing fish, sourcing protein, and just taking another step towards that kind of self-sufficiency thing. Now, self-sufficiency, yes, but I am depending on a chartered boat and a fishing guide because I also am more than aware of what I don't know. And, you can call that, I guess, maturity, or you can call it self-awareness, but I try to make it a point to know what I don't know because not knowing what you don't know, obviously very dangerous. So I will be using the services of a guide, but pretty excited about it. However, I had a lot of things that I wanted to talk about in the past few weeks in the podcast and a lot of topics I wanted to get into because more than just talking about, our current DIY projects or where we're hunting, where we're fishing, what we're building, all the things, all the actions, I think underlying a lot of what's going on with Now You Try and why this is such an exciting project for Luke and myself is that there really is an underlying core philosophy. And, we try to say that in as brief a way as we possibly can, and in several different ways. One of the most common is that we say, buy less, do more. And that really is, if you're going to break it down to its most pure form, that's really what this is. We talk a lot about, those three terms that we use that are like the subtitle of the show, the self-sufficiency, sustainability, craftsmanship. And you can break those out into a lot of different areas and a lot of different areas of expertise, a lot of different skills, a lot of different knowledge bases. And that also gives you just a big list of things to learn. But I really wanted to dive in a little bit further. So I dug into the bookshelf and I dug into, the things that kind of got me to the place I am along with Luke about why this lifestyle and why integrating this stuff into our, admittedly, easy lifestyles that we have, these suburban middle-class lifestyles that we have. Why do we want to make things harder? Why do we want to do this? And I wanted to explore with all of you listening kind of what we consider the core, like the core things that you need to have as a person, as a human being, to be able to try new things, to be able to have the kind of lifestyle where you're making an impact in sustainability, self-sufficiency, you're becoming a craftsman. What does it take? Like, what are the things you need to focus on? We tried to look at what are the dimensions of a person when you distill it down. What are skill sets? What are things? What are some practical hands-on facets of their personality or who they are that can be useful? That can be really, really multidimensional. Like, if you had to break it down to like, what are the five things? And that's really what it kind of came down to, is this core of five things. If you work on these, if you pay attention to these and you develop yourself in these facets, you're going to find that a lot of the other things that we talk about, the more esoteric things like the self-sufficiency, sustainability, and the buy less, do more, those things become easier because you've built up this foundation. You've started with solid bricks. You've got good materials with these five things. So with that being said, I wanted to jump into this stuff. And, one that is near and dear to me, obviously, and we have talked about it on the podcast previously when we talked our episode about, it was called Be Better, and we talked about your responsibility for physical fitness and how that fits into this sustainable life, this self-sufficient life, why that's important. And I think that's big enough for me to where I believe that needs to be number one. And so number one is a baseline of fitness. Socrates said, "No man has the right to be an amateur in the matter of physical training. It is a shame for a man to grow old without seeing the beauty and strength of which his body is capable." So the reason physical fitness matters so much is because, well, for one, and maybe most importantly, this is the only body you get. All the other things that you want to do, everything on your wish list, everything on your that you want to try, everything that you want to do to be more self-sufficient requires a vehicle to do it. And this is the body you're given. Not everybody's given the same body. Obviously, the deck is stacked differently for everybody. Some people have physical gifts. Heaven knows that I know lots of people, lots of athletes who are extremely physically gifted, physical geniuses. And, on the other end of the spectrum, I know plenty of people who don't have those gifts, but still can, put forth the right amount of effort in developing the body that they have into the machine, into the instrument that they want it to be. And that's really what, to me, physical fitness has meant a lot of different things throughout my life. Obviously, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, is that it meant vanity, obviously, as you're younger. It was a way to get girls to notice you. But along with that, there was sort of an undercurrent there that I had been playing sports since I was young. And along with that were some physical fitness lessons, along with, if in the United States you have PE classes, you have physical education, and that's fantastic. But while doing those things and competing and trying to get better at sports, you're actually learning some physical fitness lessons. And you're getting some foundations that I think a lot of people don't realize, that once they, as an adult, start getting into it, they can fall back on those foundations and realize, like, oh, well, maybe my coach kind of knew what they were talking about there. Oh, that's why my PE coach made me stretch. Things like that will come back to you over time. It's kind of like where, you figure out how smart your parents are as you get older. Same sort of thing with a lot of your teachers. But, it goes through a lot of different phases. Like I said, attracting the opposite sex, then performing better in sports, whether it be in high school or for anybody that played in college or that did anything post-collegiate professionally. Your physical fitness is about that. It's maintaining the machine that's making that sport possible for you. It can mean more. It can start to have what I can only describe as like a spiritual or religious effect on people sometimes, that it can give you direction, that the idea of building your body and conquering goals, whether they be for strength, endurance, even appearance, performance in a sport, surmounting those obstacles really does teach a lot of lessons. And it's cliche, and it's been done to death in the social media manufactured inspiration culture that exists out there now. But there really is something to it. There really is something to setting a goal, breaking it, and then realizing that you're not at the end because you hit a goal, that you are now just in process permanently, that you are always a work in progress. And there is something that a lot of other parts of your life, a lot of other things like work, a lot of other things like relationships won't teach you as starkly as, as a barbell and weights, or as, time spent on the track, time spent running, time spent, throwing, competing, whatever you want to, whatever dimension, whatever way you find to get inspired by it to use your body. You're never going to find, I don't want to say never, but it's rare to find something that speaks so directly to you as overcoming physical obstacles to reach a goal. There really is something magical about that, I guess, is one way to say it, that it's not just what you become at the end of your, your kind of goal seeking, of your quest for whatever level of fitness strength you want. It's not just what you become. It's the act of becoming that's so important. I try to pass that on to my kids in every possible thing where they're learning and growing and developing, but physical fitness is one where that's especially true. The person that arises out of the process of becoming is really what it's about. That's really what sets you up. It's hard to argue against something, an endeavor, a hobby, whatever you want to call it, that gives you the ability to see an end goal that may seem almost impossible and show you that you have to take small incremental progress that is hard, that's difficult, that's not always fun in order to get there and reach that goal. I mean, that's golden, having something that teaches you that. And at the same time gives you a body, a vehicle that's more adapted and more able to do the things that you're training it to do. If you want a body that's stronger, you lift heavy things until it gets stronger and adapts to doing that. There's a principle for it in fitness. It's specific adaptation to imposed demand. That's a fancy way of saying whatever you ask your body to do, it's going to get better at doing. So if you want a body that is better at, that climbing mountains, that's better at taking you to where you need to be for a mountain hunt, like I'm doing in September, then you train for that and you see the progress happen. Does it happen linearly and you're always getting better? No, absolutely not. And therein lies some of the even more important lessons about physical fitness, or that come from physical fitness, is that your progress isn't linear, but there has to be progress or attempts at progress made in some way, shape, or form every single day. or every single time that you put your hands on the implements of your profession or of your chosen goal, or any time that you enter the environment in which you're trying to work. Those are hugely valuable lessons. So again, I think the idea of strength and fitness in my life, that, it has had the influence that it has, that it prepared me, it set me up for so many goals. A good example of this, Dave Tate talks about in his book, Raising the Bar. Dave Tate is the founder and CEO of Elite FTS, which is a company that started as a company that supplied powerlifters. Now they supply, strength equipment across the board and have a ton of different endeavors, but they were one of the first content producers in the world of lifting and powerlifting. And Dave really took that and ran with it with his Q&As for, years and years and years. And that spawned, well-known lifters and authors like Jim Wendler and an entire culture around that. But, Dave has a section in his book where he talks about his training. He talks about training at Westside Barbell, one of the most famous powerlifting gyms in the world, if not the most. But I love this passage because it's so applicable to so many other situations that when you're trying to progress, when you're trying to grow. It's a subheading called the mini-max. And Dave says, one of the most frustrating things that can happen in the gym is hitting a sticking point, or mini-max. This is when your progress comes to a stop. In order to advance and improve the lift, you have to find your way around these. Sticking points are a normal part of the process. It would be silly to think you could keep adding 5 pounds per month to each lift. Sometimes you'll advance quickly. Other times you'll advance at a more moderate pace. Occasionally, however, you won't advance at all. I know of 3 main ways to overcome sticking points in the weight room. Mental. These fixes are highly specific and personal to the individual lifter. They can include prioritizing training, believing in yourself, instilling discipline, and gaining a better understanding of the training process. These can be addressed in a variety of different ways. Physical. Muscle imbalances and weak muscle groups can hold lifters back in the weight room. Weak movement planes, weak segments, or specific movement planes can also hold back lifters. Special exercises are performed in order to bring up weak areas. Finally, technical. Proper form is vital to the execution of any lift. As you advance in the sport, these technical issues become much more important. At any professional level meet, the one thing that will immediately stand out is the exceptional quality of the form practiced by world-class lifters in every movement they execute. At this level, if a weight moves just 1 inch in the wrong direction, the lifter can and will miss a lift. So I have hearts in my eyes about that breakdown. It's just, I love it so much because it's so applicable to so many other things, is that if something is broken or if you're stuck somewhere and you can't make progress, let's take powerlifting, weights, barbell, anything out of it and just look at that you can fix your mental approach, you can fix your mindset, you can fix the tools that you're using, whether that's your body, physical, or whether that's the actual tools of the trade. And you can look at the technical side of it, how exactly it's being done, the process. How is your process? How is the order? How is the consistency? How is that being, how are you handling that? How is that being addressed? I absolutely love that. And an excerpt like that, to me, is a sign of somebody who has learned the lessons that physical fitness and strength have to teach. And that's why they're able to say it so succinctly. The next facet of the core I want to talk about is study. The ability to integrate knowledge, the ability to apply knowledge. Neuroscientist John Scoyles in 1999 proposed that the human brain grew to its present size to make possible the accumulation of expertise, not intelligence per se. Humans develop skills over many years. Hunters continue to learn tracking skills for many years so that young bushmen in their 50s or 60s might accompany a son on the hunt to interpret sign. We all start life in some way, shape, or form, after we, even, I was about to say after we learn to walk and talk, but honestly, even walking and talking requires a certain amount of study. We're hardwired to walk and talk. Language is this insane thing I could do an entire another episode on. This idea that we're kind of hardwired for that. And that's one of the things that makes us human, and the ability to walk on 2 legs, all that kind of stuff. But there is a certain amount of study, and there is a certain amount of imitation. There's a certain amount of integration, adaptation, all this kind of good stuff. But really, when we think about studying, we really think about school, right? That's like the first word that's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word study. Because you start thinking of, work that was brought home with you or things you had to do in school. And I think some would say that that's a shame that we associate it with that. But, you have to look at, I guess you have to look at the advantage that a modern education system gives. And don't ever forget that, education, formal education is really novel in terms of evolution, of the human animal. That's a very novel thing. So the fact that it's hard and difficult and some people aren't great at it, and that reading, writing, and arithmetic don't come naturally to people, don't ever take for granted that's everybody should be able to get it, or there's something wrong with that person. This is such a novel thing that this human brain, this ape, has not had a long time to adapt to the idea of looking at squiggly lines on paper and turning that into concepts and then making squiggly lines back to explain that concept. Just wanted to put that out there. A guy that did a decent amount of studying, Albert Einstein, said the following: "Never regard study as a duty, but as an enviable opportunity to learn to know the liberating influence of beauty in the realm of the spirit for your own personal joy and to the profit of the community to which your later works belong." My favorite part of that quote is the last part where he says, "to the profit of the community to which your later works belong," because that is one of the things that is a cornerstone of what we believe on this podcast, with the website, all the content that we put out, is that by doing these things, by taking responsibility back, by taking your life back, by becoming more autonomous, like asking less of the world, buying less, by doing that, you are benefiting not only yourself and improving your life, you are doing it to the profit of the community to which you belong. That may be your family, that may be your neighborhood, that may be your city. Depending on the scope of your works and what you can do, that may be your state, your country, that could be the world. Somebody like Einstein, his works and what he was able to study and what he was able to apply was to the benefit of the world. So you can't think in terms of this is working for me and this is something that makes me a little bit better. You can't just think in those terms. Those terms are important because the most change you can affect as a person is at the level of the individual, at you. That's where you can apply, work, and study immediately. But you can't ever forget that you can benefit a lot. You can benefit your circle. You can benefit the people next to you, either by example or by the actual, again, by the profits of your work, by what you do, the fruits of your labor. So study is incredibly important in that regard. I kind of made, in the last couple of years, I've really made a study of study. I know that's a terrible play on words, but it's true. I really started looking at, because I have this sort of, as I've called it in the past, this kind of do whatever gene. And it expresses itself once every decade or so, where I just want to try everything all the time. I'm a hobby collector. I want to give everything a shot. I want to look into everything. I want to follow every rabbit hole. I want to do all, I want to figure out just beyond the surface level of everything. I want to get to the next level. I want to get good at stuff, or I want to get knowledgeable of things. And, I've always prided myself on being a quick study and being able to pick up the gist of things fast. And I started wondering, is that an innate thing about me? Is that a talent that I have? Because I've certainly introduced it to people as such. I'll get it. I'm a quick study. That's just something about me, as douchey as that sounds. But, I believed that it was an innate talent. And maybe there is something to that. And maybe that can be linked back to, upbringing. That can be linked back to my environment. I can be linked to whatever general intelligence you want to apply to people, or multiple intelligences, if that has something to do with it. But I really started looking at it from a pragmatic standpoint of, okay, let's say it maybe it is a talent, maybe it isn't. How do I get better at learning things? How do I get better at studying? How do I get better at integrating something and then being able to turn around and apply that? What's the process for that? So I first looked, because I was very heavily involved in sports and lifting, in competing in the Highland Games, and I kind of looked at how are my practices structured? How, when I need to learn a new thing, or I need to improve on one facet of a thing, how do I do that? What does a practice look like? So I came up with something that some of you may have heard me talk about before. It's called the practice code. So the practice code is this. And while I'm saying this, if any of you were athletes or you've done anything in a competitive realm, whether with yourself or others, or whether you've tried to advance in a field, I want you to think about it as I'm going through these. I want you to think about what your rehearsals, your practice, your studying, what that looked like while I'm saying this, and see if it matches up. I think it's pretty interesting how it tends to work out. So the practice code. First, you break it apart. 2, you slow it down. 3, you use variations and partials. So that's breaking it even into smaller pieces. And instead of doing it as it's supposed to look or it's supposed to exactly be done, you vary and play with the rules, or you cut parts of it out and only do small pieces without completing. 4, you put it back together. And then 5, finally, you progressively add speed or intensity. So the last step is to try to get it up to the speed or the intensity level where you would normally want to be doing it. And I noticed as I started applying this that, or I guess looking through this lens is a better way to say it, that it applied in so many places, that it kept showing up. And when I would teach seminars and when I'd have talks with people, I would realize that, like, I would ask, like, what background did you come from? Oh, football or martial arts or track and field, or, like if somebody does something silly like I did, like fencing, like, what did your practice look like? And it always looked pretty much like that. So I figured that can't be a coincidence. There has to be something to that. And, I realized even as I looked back over old, I'm one of those weirdos that keeps a lot of my stuff from college forever ago, like 400 years ago, I guess. And, I have like a lot of my old notebooks and a lot of my old syllabi. And I found that the structure of a university class, or the unit of a class, or a chapter that we're learning, like, or, whatever it may be, a lab discussion is going to follow that same route. So, there's more to be said, there's more to be written, but that practice code, I think, is really something. And I think it's important for somebody that wants to have the kind of approach to life that we talk about in Now You Try. If you want to be able to, you've never gardened a day in your life and you want to start going a backyard garden, or you want to take up hunting later in life when you have no history of that, or, you want to figure out sustainable practices for building things, or you want to figure out, whatever it may be. I think you're going to find that as you get your hands into these things and you read about them, that you're going to find that this practice code is going to be extremely useful for you. So yeah, take that and run with it if you want to. Now, I will say, I'll make a note about reading. I know not everybody is an avid reader. I go off and on, to be perfectly honest. I have, just like everything else, I do it in fits and starts. I'll read, consume, digest just a ton of books at a time, and just be voracious about books. But then there'll be months where I don't really pick up anything new. And I feel like a lot of people are probably like that. But reading does offer you not just access to knowledge, not just access to words on paper that you can spend time with. It offers you the ability to integrate things and work with them internally without having to work externally. And if you do it enough, and you've combined that enough with real life work, real world work, applied work, then I think you're going to find that you can ingest ideas from, words on paper. You can ingest text, and you can put that to real world tests inside your mind without having to go down every single physical rabbit hole and try them, or every single social, every single intellectual pursuit. You don't have to follow them necessarily to be able to start discerning, like, hey, this is applicable here, or this is not applicable here. And, you start to, maybe some people would call that, you start to develop taste in what you read. I'm not sure. Maybe that's what that is. But, I think that's one of the true benefits of reading, is that it gives you a testing ground. And it, without distraction, without relying on other senses, without relying on your hearing, taste, smell, touch, without relying on a great deal of emotional attachment, you're able to take in ideas and you're able to test them. I'm a big reader of nonfiction, and that's one of the reasons why I like to bring in new information to create hypothesis with, to create new things that, hey, I'm interested in that. Actually, that seems pretty neat. Let me try that in the real world. Or let me add that, like, I have a fly fishing manual that I'm looking at on my bookshelf right now. And I remember reading that, as I was starting in fly fishing, and I realized like, oh, you know what? That is similar, like some of the techniques for, finding fish. Not, the fishing part, still a giant mystery to me. I'm terrible at it. But the finding fish part is like, well, you know what? That actually kind of passes muster in my mind with some of the principles of hunting and, how and tracking, like that meshes with that. So if I can, instead of just saying like, I got to come up with a whole new part of my brain for tracking fish, I start to realize in doing that, and this isn't unique to me, I think everybody goes through things like this. I realize, okay, I can now integrate that with the part of my brain that lights up when I'm tracking in the field. When I'm, tracking fish for fly fishing, when I'm trying to find fish and I'm hunting fish, I can, those same parts are going to light up. So while the practice code is certainly good for the practical, again, it's right there in the word practice, I guess, is when you're, out there, when you're practicing, when you're trying to improve, you're trying to learn, I think the practice code is important. But reading, I think, is, if you're going to put it on a scale, it's going to balance with the practice code portion of it. Because I do believe while you can't become an expert just by reading, you can also never truly become, you can become an expert by just doing. I don't want to say that you can't, but I think you can become transcendent if you're able to practice extensively to expertise, but you're also able to understand the backing behind it, both, theoretically, understand the philosophy behind what you're doing, whatever that may be. I think that's true mastery. I think that's the next level, if you want to call it that. Next facet of the core, communication. This is a tricky one. Communication, I think, especially in the modern sense, has a lot of potential meanings. Obviously, it has a dictionary meaning. We're going to transmit an idea from one person to another. We're going to, communicate, right? But it's not just one of those where you can say like, oh, this is something you need to get better at to make yourself better. Obviously, you can say that, but that can mean a whole lot of different things in the modern world with as many forms of communication as we have. And not just that, just all the implications of communicating with another person. That's the thing. It's not just a solo endeavor anymore. Communicating means that you're involving other people. And that's why I think it gets tricky. And that's why it's not just something you can say like, oh, hey, if you want to be more like we talk about on this podcast, just become better at reading and writing. Well, okay, sure, that would help. It certainly would help. I'm never going to tell anybody not to improve those skills. But there's a lot more to it because, we talked about studying and we talked about, self-improvement so far. But what our ability to communicate our ideas to each other is one of those things that really makes us uniquely human. Moreover, what makes humans unique, it's one of the things that makes us human. And we even talk about this a little bit. I think it's in the description of the podcast. If anybody reads that, also go leave a review there while you're reading that. Right? See, I did my job. So we talk about that. Don't lose track, don't lose hold, don't lose sight of the things that make us uniquely human. These things like, like agriculture, like hunting, things like cooperation, like building, forging your environment, changing the world to suit your needs. I mean, that's the most human thing possible. That is humanity. Our ability to modify our environment, to forge the earth into what we want it to be. That is, the scale at which we're able to do that as human beings is obviously unprecedented, unless there was some ancient alien civilization, which I'll keep watching History Channel. I'll let you know if I figure anything else out. There'll be a whole other episode. But that is a uniquely human thing we have. But one of the things that makes that possible, maybe the thing that makes that so possible, is our ability to communicate. The spoken word, written communication, signs, not even if you want to go even more basic than that, it's the ability of this ape that we are to be able to transmit an idea, a complex idea about something that's not immediately there to someone else. Abstract thought that I can, right now we're doing it. I'm sitting here in my house, hundreds or thousands of miles away from most of you listening. Except unless you're in Texas, then probably just hundreds then. That I'm talking about things that aren't in the room with you and we're not in the same place, but I'm able to get ideas into your head. I'm able to take abstract ideas and get them into your head and have you think about them too. That is very, very human. And that is something that you can't ignore in trying to build the kind of life, trying to build the kind of existence, trying to build the kind of relationship with others and the world that we keep talking about on the podcast, is that you have to be able to communicate. And communication carries with it so much implication, not just about what the thought you're trying to communicate is, but the ability to take those thoughts from other people and integrate them. And there's a fantastic book called Be, No, Do: Leadership the Army Way. So it's written by Francis Hasselbein and General Eric Shinseki. He was retired at the time of the book, but I think he came back into public service. But basically what it is, it's a civilian reimagining of the Army's leadership manual. And it's real big in the corporate world. That's how I stumbled across it back when I was working in the corporate world. But obviously, since it's about leadership, communication is a huge portion of this book. And there's one passage in particular about communication that really stuck out to me. It says, "Communicating also goes on from bottom to top. Leaders find out what their people are thinking, saying, and doing by using that most important communication tool, listening. By listening carefully, you can even hear those messages behind what a person is actually saying, the equivalent of reading between the lines. If you take a moment to think about all the training you've received under the heading communication, you'll see that it probably falls into 4 broad categories: speaking, reading, writing, and listening. You begin practicing speech early. Many children are using words by the age of 1. The heavy emphasis on reading and writing begins in school, if not before. Yet, how many times have you been taught how to listen? Of the 4 forms of communication, listening is the one in which most people receive the least amount of formal training. In most leadership situations, communication is a two-way street. So, it's equally important as the others. It often comes first because you must listen and understand before you can decide what to say. So tomorrow I leave for Galveston. I leave for the coast. And I will be doing something that I have not done since I was a child. I'll be getting on a boat, going out in the ocean to catch fish. In doing that, I'm going to, like I mentioned earlier, employ the services of a guide. And what do you think I'm going to do with that guide? Do you think I'm going to talk him up the whole time and be interested in telling him what I know? I tell you what, there's a lot of people that'll go out in that fishing boat, and that's what they'll want to do. They'll want to tell the guide what they know, and they'll be so intent on communicating that. And I cannot imagine a more stupid waste of time than telling somebody whose their job is to catch fish in this area. You want to tell them what you know. My approach tomorrow will be shut up, ask questions, and then listen to the answer. He doesn't need to know anything that I know. There's nothing about in this realm that I can teach him. He wants to know how to get his bench up. He probably shouldn't ask me that either. But he wants to know how to throw Highland Games implements. Maybe he could ask me about that. But when it comes to catching fish in the ocean, in the Galveston Bay, he's got it. And I'm going to be listening. And I'm going to try to ask the right questions. That's really my contribution to this interaction, other than cash, is that my contribution, my role in this is not just, I think it would be easy to go out there and just be passive and try to take in the knowledge that I can. And just kind of watch. And there's a lot to be said for observation, and that needs to be a good part of it. But there's also a lot more to be said about asking the correct question, asking relevant questions, and asking like high value questions. And by that, I mean getting the most bang for your buck out of a single question. Because you don't just want to pepper somebody nonstop and be annoying. You know, I know it's their job to be there, but the quality of the answers you get will decrease. The value, let's say this, the less value your questions have, the more frequently you probably have to ask questions. And the less value you're going to get back, because you're going to annoy people and you're going to pigeonhole their answers into one thing. So the communication part of learning cannot be overstated. Next facet, outdoorsmanship. Teddy Roosevelt said, "Here is your country. Cherish these natural wonders. Cherish the natural resources. Cherish the history and romance as a sacred heritage for your children and your children's children. Do not let selfish men or greedy interest skin your country of its beauty, its riches, or its romance. Now, this is one where, if I'm not careful, I could go off for a long, long time. So I'm going to do my best to be brief, but this is a passion. And this is what brought me and Luke together initially as podcasts, as podcast compatriots, is that, our first project together was a little podcast called Camo and Hooks. And really it was just an attempt at wrapping our minds around, hunting, angling, outdoorsmanship in this stage of life that we're in this relatively safe, suburban, often predictable life that we have worked so hard to get, but trying to wrap our minds around why we develop such a passion at this stage in life. So that's what Camo and Hooks was about. And it was kind of the infancy of where we are with this podcast now. Why the outdoors? Why is the outdoors on a list? Why is something that seems to be such a niche hobby? Why is that on the list of these core facets of a person that they need to work on? Why is that there? I'm going to delve into that first by reading an excerpt from a cookbook, oddly enough, the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook, written by Stephen Ranella, fantastic author. He's the host of the Meat Eater podcast and the Meat Eater television show. So he says, while most folks will eat dozens of types of fruits, vegetables, and grains throughout the year, many consume just 3 or 4 kinds of meat and only a small handful of fish species. Meanwhile, a skilled hunter and angler, no matter where he or she lives, has access to literally dozens of species of wild game, including many that would be impossible to obtain through commercial transactions. Pursuing these food resources will radically transform your perspective on life and the world you live in. When you open your eyes to the bloody, beautiful, sharp-toothed, and sometimes scary world of wild game, nothing will ever be the same. Nothing will ever be the same. I can attest to that. And that is incredibly true. And honestly, the best side effect of hunting for me and fishing has been just time spent outdoors. Has been learning to spend my time outdoors, how to extend my time spent outdoors, and how to make the most of my time spent outdoors. So why? That's really what I'm going to tackle, trying to stay brief with this as best I can. I'm going to tackle the why, because I think that'll answer a lot of the philosophical questions and, tie up a lot of loose ends. Why would you want to have the outdoors be? Well, look, having the outdoors as a hobby, that's something that you do in your spare time for fun, is another fairly recent development. You're probably aware most of human history has been spent outdoors. It's hilarious and strange in a way that we kind of have to have this idea of what our relationship with the outdoors is that, and that now there's like a multi-billion-dollar industry that's built around getting us in the outdoors and making that palatable for us and, gearing us up for that. When that's where we came from, I guess in terms of the time, the time that the earth has existed, in terms of the time of the universe. And it was really just a blink of an eye ago that we were a bunch of dirty Paleolithic, just past apes, sitting around campfires at night, like filthy and scared of what was just outside the fire's edge. And so this phenomenon that's happened, where we have to get back in touch with the outdoors, is, really it is. It is hilarious when you start thinking about the scale of history and you start thinking about what we're from. And I think there's something to that, in that one of the reasons that, people like us, and I say that to everybody listening to this, people that have been touched in this way and that are trying to reclaim these parts of their life, I think you're trying to reclaim something primal. And I know as that sounds cliche and silly, and I get it, but I believe that's what's going on. I believe the reason that men and women are more interested in getting away from factory farmed meat and getting away from, over homogenized vegetables, produce, anything else, monocultures, all the things that are going wrong with our foods, to one degree or another. I think one of the reasons that we're doing that is we are deep down trying to reclaim something primal about ourselves, and we're trying to feel like we're in charge of our lives and that somebody else is not. And for better or worse, as dangerous as, hunter-gatherer life was, you were at least in charge of your life and your food for the day, if nothing else. And I'm a big fan of breaking things down to the smallest possible unit and thinking about it that way. And really, if you break down to a pretty small unit there and realize that every day you have to eat if you want to be healthy. Hunter-gatherers don't always have that choice. Sometimes they go days without it. But if you want to eat every day, you have control over what you can gather, what you can hunt, what you can get in a hunter-gatherer life. In throughout most of humans' evolutionary past, the era of evolutionary adaptiveness, as some researchers call it, like, you were in charge of that. You had to be. You had to play a part. You had to have a role in it. And you had to play a role in your survival. I think a lot of us feel like we don't play a part in it anymore other than just warming it up or putting on a plate. And I don't feel like we have any role in our survival other than putting money in the bank. And while those things work in the modern era, I don't think that's it. So why? Why does the outdoors matter? To me, you learn things in the outdoors like independence, toughness, resourcefulness, stillness of mind, tying knots, craftsmanship, cooking, shooting, biology, ecology, ethics. All of those things have come into greater focus for me by spending more time in the outdoors as an adult. And I think it's no coincidence that people who grow up in the outdoors and have a more close relationship with it tend to have a moral compass that's more well-developed and sharpened than those of us who didn't. We might disagree on, the politics part of it, the economics of it. We might disagree on all that stuff. Fine. But I think it's easier to develop a realistic, applicable moral compass and an ethical grounding when you have time in the outdoors, because there are undeniable truths out there, and it's not always pretty. But going back through that list, I had to write that down. I didn't just memorize all those words, guys. Independence. Most of the time that I spend outdoors is alone. It's me and the wildlife. Toughness, I think that speaks for itself. There's no air conditioning. Come on, it's Texas. That should be toughness enough right there. But look, you get hurt, or you get exhausted, and you have to count on that physical fitness we talked about. Resourcefulness. You don't always have your smartphone with you. You don't always have electricity. You shouldn't if you're doing it right. You don't have running water. Sometimes you don't have the right kind of cordage, like rope. You have to figure out how to do things on the fly. You have to figure out how to move a huge dead animal from one location to the other without any kind of motor vehicle. Stillness of mind, that one is extremely important to me, because that is, until you spend time in the outdoors, not just hiking and not just hanging out, but with a purpose, you will find a stillness of mind that is better than any meditation that I've ever managed to work myself into. I might just not be that good at meditating. Tying knots, craftsmanship, I kind of say those tongue in cheek, like the tying knots, but I didn't know how to tie any knots until I became an adult who spent time in the outdoors hunting and fishing. Like, I knew a couple of knots to tie my shoes and to tie stuff down in my truck. And it was different in the truck every time, by the way. It was just some mutant knot that I came up with. But, you learn to tie some useful knots because you don't have any other choice. You have to be resourceful. You have to figure it out. You have to be a craftsman with a lot of different materials, rope and, a fishing line being one of them. You have to learn to build things on the fly. Like, I've never been so inclined to build shelter, or so inclined to build a cabin, or, build like a dock structure than I have since I've started spending time outside and wanted to do things out there. Cooking goes without saying. That's a big part. Luke is a professional chef and a chef instructor, and his cooking game has just been stepped up many, many notches by the addition of wild game. And by the addition of gardening his own food, by the addition of using, wild gathered ingredients. And, I could go again, it's a long list. And I'll try not to harp on each one too much, but it's hard. I love this stuff. Shooting, hunting, shooting, accuracy, throwing, those things are, again, fundamentally human. No other animal really does that. No other animal builds a projectile weapon and fires it. That's us. You're in touch with something very human by doing that. Whether it's rifle, whether it's bow, crossbow, I don't care. Whether you're throwing a spear, throwing knives, I don't care. Like that's fundamentally human. I mean, you want to get into the physiology of it. God, I promised I wouldn't get too deep into this, but I mean, the idea of, throwing spears, throwing rocks, using slings. Our shoulder is unlike any other joint in the animal kingdom with our ability to do that. And the fact that our wrist has the mobility that it does, that we can add speed to thrown objects, that was like selected for. That's us. I keep saying that's humanity. That's part of who we are. And by not partaking in those things, whether you approve of guns, weapons, hunting, anything like that, by not partaking in some way of those things, you're just missing out. And you're missing out on the wildlife out there. I mentioned biology and ecology. You'll never understand an animal or a plant more than you will than when you're trying to find it. And then when you're trying to gather it, when you're trying to harvest it, and you're trying to pull resources from it. You'll never understand an animal better than you did then. I remember taking a deer apart. The first time Luke and I took a deer apart together, it was out at his parents' land. We were taking it apart, and I'm just, whenever you take any animal apart, like it's never, of course it gets tedious, and it can, but there's still, to me, there's a sense of awe, there's a sense of wonder, and it's interesting. It's just like, I don't know, when you're a kid in science class and dissecting a frog, which I never did, by the way, but it's the same kind of thing. And, I was pointing out just a, particular, I don't know what I was pointing out, is a particular tendon attachment and how like thick and powerful it looked, and how I thought like, man, that explains like the speed and the jumping, and he said so plain, it's like, yeah, aren't they cool? And it was such a cool sentiment. I loved that so much because it was just this very raw appreciation of like, we had taken the life of this thing, and we were going to harvest it, and we were going to, we were harvesting, we're in the process, we were going to use it for food. We fed our families with it. But in that moment, there was an appreciation that I would have not had I just seen another whitetail on the side of the highway. And I could talk, again, the last point on my list that I went through there is ethics. I could talk at length about that, but I think I said a lot of it right there. That other than just wanting to take, you understand that your participation in hunting has meaning, but it also has impact. And that as a hunter, as a fisher, as a fisherman, and as an outdoorsman, that you have a responsibility to something bigger, to wildlife, to the planet, to the environment in which that wildlife lives. And I think that perspective, just like we talked about with reading and anything else, with practice and study, is that you can start to apply that to other things very easily. And you can start to see, hey, you know what? What I do does matter, even if it doesn't feel like it to me, because I'm part of a collective here that's making decisions. And those decisions add up. So whether that's how you choose to get rid of your trash, or how you choose to treat other people, time in the outdoors teaches you that you are one link in a chain, and that chain is part of a giant web that's interconnected. The final of these 5 facets I want to talk about is competition. The economist L.C. Thoreau said, "A competitive world offers 2 possibilities. You can lose, or if you want to win, you can change." There's a lot of people, a lot smarter than me, a lot better coaches, a lot more philosophically grounded than me, that have talked about the advantages of losing. And that, a lot of fighters are fond of saying you win or you learn. And those are people, when, the learning part of it involves getting punched in the head that you're unconscious, I would tend to take their word for it, that they really understand that. I'm always surprised when someone says I'm not a competitive person. So, I'm injecting my own philosophy here, but that it tells me one of 2 things about that person. That like they've either been soured on competition by losing, and they did not use them to get better. Or alternatively, that they are competitive, they just don't realize it. So like the first option where they've been soured on competition is it's easier, but it's a lot harder to fix. It's a lot harder to remedy. There's cliches here, right? Like real winners persevere. They overcome. They use their failures to fuel the next victory. And like some people are so afraid to lose that they will completely forgo anything that even resembles competition in the least. And we see this with kids. You know, I have the advantage of seeing this as a dad, is that I think there's a natural inclination sometimes in children before they develop a certain amount of grit. And some kids are absolute savages, don't get me wrong, but like a lot of kids have this to where like, well, if I'm going to lose, then why would I want to get involved? And I think deep down, I think we can all kind of relate to that. I think it's a growth process to get to where you can continue to stand up in the face of pretty much a certain loss, right? That takes something. That takes some maturity. But when someone is lacking that fundamental desire, and adults especially, is lacking that like fundamental desire to stand up, brush yourself off, try again, it's sad. It's hard. It's hard to watch for me personally. It might not even be their fault. I mean, there are terrible parents in this world. There are terrible families. There are terrible friends that don't support people. But it's something that only that person can repair. Only you can repair that. Like, somebody else may have broken it, but it's not telling you to fix it. Like the second option, like I said, that if somebody really is competitive and they don't realize it, I think that's more common nowadays. Like competition, like it seems like it's easy to define, but it's really, I think it's more esoteric than I think most people believe. It's 2 times I said esoteric in the same podcast. That's got to be some sort of bonus I'm going to get, right? For most of our lives, like a playground mentality is what we have with competition. Like it harkens back to the playground competition, games, invariably teasing and whatnot. But so like we're raised kind of in environments that get us believing like competition is defined as external. Like winning is beating somebody else. Victory lies in defeating others. And there's nothing wrong with that definition. Like it's a fundamental force for successful individuals. Like even like entire cultures, like big groups of people. Like there's nothing wrong with wanting to defeat another. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, like in its purest form. Like a lot of us, like that are involved in organized sports, like you take that desire to defeat someone, and you can turn that into a weapon. Like you can turn that into a really effective psychological weapon. Like with good coaching, you can harness that, direct it. There's a whole field, sports psychology, that talks about that works exclusively on the mindset of athletes and how important that is. Obviously, it's a big deal. There's something really fundamental about it. I think though, like most people who aren't professional athletes, or just any of us as we grow up and we leave that playground mentality, like we get more introspective. Yeah, like not everyone has that ability or the desire to compete at a high level of sports. Most of us, not the ability. That's kind of how statistics work, right? That's why they're paid so well, because they're the few people that really can. But for most people, like the rest of us, there's no opponent to defeat and like to motivate us to do stuff. There's no like person you gotta beat. Maybe sometimes at work, like there's someone you have to outdo, but like the only person you have left to compete with on a daily basis is, you guessed it, you. So I like people who learn to harness that desire to better themselves and to constantly improve. Like those can be some of the most effective, driven, and dangerous people on earth, man. So like these are the people that are sharpening that kind of weapon themselves, their own psyche, but that the same breath they'll say, I'm not a competitive person. Like it's not true. Like I think what's safer to say is like that person to say, I don't want to compete with you. And like the idea of being a better person than they were is like the only kind of motivation they need. And that, again, just like that super competitive person, those Michael Jordan people, those people are dangerous, man. They can get stuff done, and they can do it with no need for external motivation beyond themselves. So, but they may say they're not competitive because they don't see, like they don't play pickup basketball or whatever, or they don't They don't care if they lose money at poker or whatever. Like, they don't get fired up about foosball. If you don't get fired up about foosball, you're dead, by the way. You don't have a pulse. That's intense. I'm embarrassingly terrible at foosball. I don't know how I got through college, honestly. So there's a synthesis here that I'm working towards, is that you can do both. Like, you can be both of those kind of people. Like, what about those people? The people that can focus on beating you or beating anybody in front of them, but they also have that ability, like, to constantly be sharpening the blade and beating themselves all the time. Like, that's greatness, right? That probably is the Michael Jordan. You can't even describe him as just competitive against other people. He's both. So, I mean, and those are rare people. I'm sorry, it's true, but those are rare people. They can lead, they can inspire. I mean, they can also be a huge disappointment. But I mean, that's why we watch those people on television. We have their posters on the wall. Like, it should be the goal of anyone trying to improve their life in any way to become somewhat like those inspirational people. There's nothing wrong with looking up to people who are able to compete and win. There's nothing wrong with that. I guess what I want to say really is that no one should shy away from competition. Like, compete with yourself, but don't lie to yourself and think that, you don't get something out of competition. And if you're built to compete with others, don't just pick the battles you can win, because that's going to scratch your itch, right? If you just constantly win, that's going to scratch your itch, but it's not going to build you into anything. So, either find new competition or maybe try stepping over to the side where you compete against yourself. The competition part of this and how it fits into Now You Try, I guess maybe it comes from a personal place, because I always want to be better than the person that I was before, the person I was yesterday. I always want to be better than that guy. I always want to do more than that. And for a long time, that meant being stronger, faster, smarter, make more money. That's what those things meant. And that's normal. That's fine. But now it means something different to me. The getting better than the person I was yesterday was, what am I capable of? I didn't even expect to say it that way. I'm looking at my notes. That word did not, to describe this part, didn't make it about. I was going to say things like, what am I contributing? Or, what am I, what am I putting into the world? What good am I doing? But really, like that, I like that word better. What am I capable of now compared to that guy from yesterday, from 2 weeks ago, from a year ago, from 10 years ago? What am I capable of that he wasn't? And what's been so important to me in this chapter of my life, and I think maybe a little bit, maybe all along it has been, but now it's just I realize it, is what can I do for myself, and what can I do without having to rely on other people that still that puts a net positive in the world, that does net good for my family, for my community, for my country. What are those things that I can do? Not just what's going to make me feel good about what I'm doing. Tangible result. What am I growing? What am I building? What am I producing? What am I inspiring other people to do that's demonstrable? What kind of person am I that can be relied on to get help? What kind of things are people asking me for help with? That's another great one too. What do you get asked for help with? Are you good enough or capable enough of something to where people come to you to ask for your help and you give it? That's where you should be. That's what you should be aiming for. Any new endeavor, anything you want to do, anything you want to contribute, you should feel strong enough about it and work hard enough at it to where you can help when it's called upon. I think that's a great final goal for anything that you're doing. And I think as you become an adult and a parent or a guardian to somebody or a friend or a leader anywhere, I think that's something you should aim for, is that your contribution will not just be in spirit and it won't just be a token, that your contribution will be meaningful. What are you capable of? Thanks for listening to the Now You Try podcast. Check out content related to this episode and all other episodes, or contact us with questions at nowyouTry.com.